This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Please consider rating and reviewing the podcast on the Apple Podcast Store, rate the podcast on Spotify, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. Last week, I had mentioned being on Robert Peoples' Affinis Humanity Instagram Live. It turns out that didn't happen last week. We are still planning that a couple of weeks from now. I'll have more specifics once it actually happens. You may not know that I have a YouTube channel. It's something that I put a lot of effort into the first year and a half of the podcast, but I have not had enough time to focus on it. On its own, with me doing nothing since mid-2021, I've gained something like 300 followers, and it's starting to get traffic on its own without me doing anything. Typically, what is posted there is the podcast with a graphic and a visualization of the audio. And there's also a few what are called audiograms, so just a quote from the episode that is a minute or two long. What I'd like to do here is put out the call. If you have any video skills, and this is fairly rudimentary, not complex at all, and be willing to work with me to bring us back up to date on the YouTube channel, that would be absolutely amazing. Get in touch with me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. On to today's show. My guest today is Drew Common. Drew grew up a missionary kid and was very focused on community all of his life, including in recent years, intentional community, and he is currently developing a community in Comer, Georgia called The Perch, a nonprofit community center trying to bring folks together. This episode requires a bit of context. There's two elements of context that I need to provide. I'm going to provide one of those now and one of those in the final thoughts section. The first bit of context is that due to technical difficulties, we didn't use my favored recording platform, Zencastr. We were on Zoom. This is also the reason that my mic sounds terrible in the interview. I must not have had the right mic selected in Zoom. You probably know that if you don't pay for Zoom, you have a 40-minute time limit. That time limit really affected the conversation. About 3/4 of this conversation is very typical for a show on The Graceful Atheist, and we wrapped things up with something like 5 minutes to go, with a literal countdown in front of both of us. Drew had more to say, so we jumped into the deep end of a conversation that would take an entire podcast on its own. I left this part in because I think it's important, and it will require more context that I will discuss at the end. Keep in mind that we literally had a timer in front of us, and that is why it sounds like I'm being very abrupt at the end there. That is one of the reasons why I sound like I'm being abrupt. If you don't listen to the final thought section of this, I will just say this. Do keep your skeptic's hat on as you are listening. Here is Drew to tell his story. Drew, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Thanks. Great to be here. I'm really excited about being able to share my story with you. I've been kind of binging on the Deconversion podcast. I've worked my way through your whole back catalog, and
wow,
I moved on to Voices of Deconversion. So being able to be a part of this now is great for me.
That's fantastic, and I love Voices of Deconversion as well, and what Steve has been doing over there. That's a great podcast also. So, Drew, fantastic. What we always do is begin with, what was your faith tradition like when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I was born in London, and my parents were just starting their missionary adventure. Which shortly after I was born, we moved to Vienna. This is 1977. So I spent my early years growing up in Vienna, where my parents were working in Eastern Europe, which would have, communist country. They were based out of Vienna, and they would make trips into Eastern Europe to meet with the underground church, or
Mhm.
so that was pretty formative. And when we moved back to the U.S. around when I was about 7, and they continued to work for the same organization, which was initially in New York, New Jersey area, and then the U.S. headquarters moved down to Georgia. So that's where I kind of spent my teenage years in Georgia.
So yeah, your parents were doing the real deal going into the communist bloc countries where it was illegal to do so. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So very committed. It was a, I don't know, parachurch organization. So the denominations were, just evangelical or Protestant, so not like what, a lot of people that you've talked to comes from like a really fundamentalist kind of strict religious environment. It wasn't that. It was
right.
Basically, but my mom told me about, how to be saved from my sin. And when I was 3 years old, and
right.
And, I, accepted that as any 3-year-old would. And,
yes.
Prayed the prayer and accepted Jesus into my heart. And yeah, it was just the water I was swimming in.
And then as you grew up, was this something that you took on for yourself besides just your parents' religion?
Yeah, it was. Most children are sensitive creatures, but I was a very sensitive, and I was a middle child. So I was kind of the peacemaker role in my family. But yeah, I had a very kind of intimate relationship. I guess that's the way I would have described it, with God and with Jesus throughout
Mhm.
my teenage years. And now looking back on my childhood, I would say that I was depressed, and I had suicidal ideation throughout my teenage years, which I did the whole thing. Many people talk about recommitting their life to Christ over and over again. And so, I mean, one significant moment was at one of these youth group services or whatever. And I was, I knew that they were going to be doing the altar call. And so I was like kind of doing a little pre-prep just to make sure that I wasn't in need of that, like before the service started.
Yeah.
And I felt like at that point I had like a physical sensation on my body of like, it felt like wave of energy or like water kind of flowing through my body. And so that was like a significant moment for me, because it was like it became something that was like real directly to my physical experience.
Right. And how old were you when that happened?
14.
Okay. Yeah, so that'd be pretty transformative.
Yeah, so I was a committed Christian, and I knew that I had a real relationship with Jesus throughout my teenage years, but I wasn't like legalistic or anything like that. I was, I did the normal teenage stuff or whatever, like getting into trouble and blah, blah, blah. But when I graduated from high school, I decided to join my dad's mission organization. They had 2 ships which sailed around the world and did Christian work with churches and missionaries. All over the world. So I decided to do that for 2 years after I finished high school, which was a transformative experience for me as well.
Yeah. What were some of the countries that you went to?
Yeah, so I flew into Calcutta, and we spent 2 years just going around Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Philippines, China, Japan, and then down into Australia, Papua New Guinea, stuff like that.
Okay.
And that was where, I have to say, like, throughout my whole Christian experience, I've had, doubts and questions, which, like are everybody who doesn't know Christ going to hell. And that didn't sit right with me from a very early age. And then being out in East Asia, experiencing, the culture and the people there that still like struggling with that whole idea, which is like kind of fundamental to the missionary
yes.
impulse.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, nevertheless, I mean, I continued to have like pretty extreme experiences of, like that experience, what at the time I called the Holy Spirit, right? Like, I had when I was in Papua New Guinea, I had this experience where my hands were filled with this energy for a whole day.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it was, we drove way out into the jungle to this river, and I stepped out of the van, and this dude just walked up to me and grabbed my hands, and the energy just flowed out of my hands into this guy.
Okay.
That's the way it felt.
Yeah.
And, so it was like, I had these like a lot of real experiences that kept me going.
Sure. Yeah. I do appreciate that the experiences feel very real while you're having them, and that, you're having some kind of physical response, and that part is real. It's just that the attribution to the Holy Spirit is the part that is mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah. So after I finished up my 2 years on the ship and returned home, and was kind of still, feeling out my direction, and which I ended up deciding, to go into construction, carpentry. I was like, I can do this. I got into carpentry, and I started doing construction, and then went back and joined YWAM.
Okay.
Because I wanted to do, I was thinking I wanted to do community development. And so I did like a 6-month term with them, which I was kind of getting burnt out with the evangelism, and like, just because I was growing more and more convinced of or uncertain about my certainty.
Right. Yeah.
Not wanting to be going around the world telling other people how they should live and be.
And just to say again, those are very natural doubts. Like, I think anybody with a heart asks those questions, why is it that it is just this one way? And as you begin to act, I think it, particularly when you begin to preach that, it hits you harder to question, wait a minute, can this possibly be true? Limited to this one way to get to heaven, kind of thing.
Yeah. So the next step for me was just jumping ahead. I did go back to university and got my degree at the University of Georgia. And one thing that really came out from my time on the ship was because we were 350 people living on a boat together from 80 different countries, was that I wanted to be a part of building community.
Okay.
Because that was such a communal experience and such a life-giving thing for me in terms of the relationships that I had there. So that's been a constant basically since that time, is like just wanting to be a part of bringing community, developing community and people together. And the way that has turned out has changed over time, because while I was at UGA, I got very interested in intentional communities, like, and so I mapped out a bunch of intentional communities within the U.S. and decided I was going to go check it out and see what's happening. And I ended up, one of the first stops was this intentional community in Cincinnati. It was a Christian intentional community. It was just, they had purchased an old Catholic church and a convent, and they were kind of doing like a community, like they lived together in the rectory and in the convent, and they had business and artists, and just trying to do that small scale, like real relationship kind of church thing, rather than just like a Sunday morning thing. So that was the first place I was on my stop, and I ended up just staying there because one of my best friends was also a part of that community. And then I ended up, they were a network of house churches. So I ended up leading a house church in Cincinnati while I was there.
Okay.
All the while continuing to go down the slope of uncertainty and in all the doctrines and the structure of the church and all that, which, I mean, house church is kind of a response to all that.
Were there anything specific? So you've already mentioned, only one way. That was one of the doubts, but was there anything else specifically that was getting to you?
Well, that leads into, this is kind of like when I experienced one of the major turning points, which was specifically what to answer your question. I think the exclusivity, which, I mean, is kind of the same thing as what you were saying, the only one way. But also I just began to see that, like, the claims that I was told would be what I would receive, or what would happen based on accepting these doctrinal statements, just didn't bear out, not only in my own life, but in
everyone else. Yeah. Yes.
Right. All the people around me. And so that was, and that specifically became clear to me at this point, because I like to tell this story about, I was sitting in a coffee house in Cincinnati, and this was right around the time that George W. was up on the screen talking about the axis of evil.
Okay. Right? Yeah.
Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. And it just struck me at that point. I was like, because it's a ridiculous idea, right? Like, that these countries are the axis of evil. These countries are evil. I've been to these countries. I've been around the world, and to put that, and so on them, I reflected back on myself, and I realized, like, that's actually what I do. That's my lens for everybody.
Right.
Like, I have this distinction that I lay over everybody, whether they're saved or unsaved, Christian or non-Christian, this was the dividing line that was in me, you know?
Yeah.
And I just saw that as being ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. That's quite self-honest and insightful to have that recognition.
Yeah. So I had that thought. And then at the same time, my brother called me. Well, and I met up with him, and he had a radical transformation in his life. He had rebelled kind of in his my older brother in his teenage years from, against the religious structure of my parents.
Sure.
And kind of gone down the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of thing. He was in a band and played music, and
I was just going to say scandalous, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, he had also developed a heroin addiction, and
got it. Yeah.
He was, I don't know if he would say he was an alcoholic, but whatever. He drank a lot and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Drew, you probably, I don't know how much of you heard of my story, but like I have lots of family drug and alcohol history, so I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he had been struggling, and I had, all the way along, I had been trying to talk with him and convince him about the way of Christ and all that. And he couldn't take it. Right. He couldn't. And I mean, at some point in my 20s or whatever, I basically got to the point where I was like, I'm done trying to convince him. I'm just gonna try to love him in the way that I can, Yeah. So I had stopped really trying to talk to him about Jesus. But he had, in his kind of like multiple attempts to kind of rehabilitate, and he had come across this group called Vipassana,
okay.
Which is a Buddhist meditation group. And they, the kind of intro to Vipassana is 10-day silent meditation. And so he had done one of these courses,
mm-hmm.
and it had, just flipped the switch for him. He basically got clean, and, it was the thing he had been looking for. And he went deep into it. He became a teacher. He was running a center. He went to India and did like 60-day meditations. And
mm-hmm.
anyways, like the point for me telling that whole story was that, like, here was, somebody I knew their previous life, and they had this radical transformation.
Right.
That didn't involve Jesus at all.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so it was like, this is the proof this is what I was told would happen, if you submit to Christ and receive Christ. And,
right.
And so that was, at that point, was just another little stick on that fire or whatever, which was leading me. Then at the same time, my best friend called me over to his house and told me that one of the assistant pastors at our church had sexually abused him for several years. And then it came out that he had sexually abused multiple young men in our church or whatever. And they were all my good friends, and
right.
It was a big, ordeal and investigations and all this stuff. And so that was another big thing that led me to just being like, I can't keep going down this track. It just it's not making sense for me, you know. And then in my own life, just feeling that still, you know, I call it's like an emotional roller coaster with God, because it's like, you know, I'm feeling good when I think I'm doing right, and then, you know, I do something and it's like I'm down and I'm all depressed, and it's all this up and down, and just really, I was tired of that.
Yeah.
And so what I saw was that the axis of evil was not a bug. It was part of what the culture of the church, and the teaching that I had received. It wasn't that I had misunderstood it, right? Like that.
Exactly.
There is this in and out, like, division that that is supposedly exists over everybody, right?
Yeah.
And that, but then, you know, I knew the verse, you know, Jesus says, "Judge not, lest you be judged." And I came to and what I realized was that what that meant was, you know, when we judge, it's impossible to escape that judgment, because you'll put it on yourself, right? Like, so the judgment is on you.
Right.
You can't escape the same judgment. And that was the point of why, you know, all this depression and self-hatred that I had been experiencing throughout my early life. And so in my mind, I actually visualized a switch of, like, you know, this judgment or judging or non-judging. And I just flipped it in my mind. It wasn't like a instantaneous feeling of, like, relief, but within a few weeks, like, I looked back and I was like, my emotional state had been constant and at peace, you know, because I had stopped that internal judging of myself, you know?
Yeah. That's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, for me, the first peace that passes understanding, you know, that was like, I finally received it when I stopped putting that filter over myself and everyone else.
Isn't that ironic? Yes.
Yeah.
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 At that time, did you still feel like you had a sense of faith, or was that already diminishing?
Oh yeah. I still had faith. I mean,
Okay.
That was, I still believed in God, as in, no, like, normally the Christian understanding of it.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. But your sense of the need to judge others or to judge yourself just went away.
Right. So then, you know, there's just a cascade of thoughts that when you get to that place where, like, oh, there's no judgment on me, no judgment on others, then it's like, okay, you know, well, hell doesn't make sense and salvation doesn't make sense. And, you know, those things take time for some people. I mean, for me, it took some years or whatever to come to those things and just, like, realize, like, yeah, I mean, I definitely got to that point, and it was like the big thing I just didn't know what to do with was, like, you know, I had this kind of intimate, like, lover relationship in my mind that I had with Christ, with Jesus, and it was like, and that was that felt good to me, you know?
Sure.
Yeah. And like, it's not that I didn't have it. It's just that I wasn't putting my mind there, you know? It's like, so how do I do this? How do I,
Yeah.
going forward? Also, what happened at the same time I was in Cincinnati, I met my wife, Karina, who her parents divorced when she was young, and her dad, and it was kind of over religion in the sense that her dad kind of became a Buddhist and her mom went more charismatic.
Okay.
That was, I mean, that's just one of the factors.
Sure. Yeah.
But in any case, like she had a father and a mother who was charismatic and a father who was more Buddhist leaning. And, you know, she had to, from a young age, like figure out a way to incorporate, you know, hold those two things at the same time, you know, like loving both of her parents. And so that had worked out into, like, she had a faith or a belief that was like more able to hold opposing viewpoints or something, you know? And so she really helped me at this time in my life where I'm like making these big transitions for me. And she was able to be there with me and help walk me through, you know, it's okay, you know, we're going to be okay. You know, it's not.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. So that sounds amazing, Drew, to have a partner alongside of you to, just like you said, say it's going to be okay. I want to hear a little bit more about like the interaction with your wife and how the two of you worked through this deconstruction process that you guys were going through.
Yeah, well, since she was already in a more open space theologically, like she was able to just allow me to go down those paths that I was going down, which involved I eventually went and did a 10-day silent meditation course with Vipassana, and that I did get some really clear insight through that time, where, because the structure of Vipassana is Buddhist, so they you know they ask you not to pray or bring your Bible. You know, you can't have any books or any writing, and you're submitting to the Buddha and to, you know, I don't know, they make you say these things, and which was, you know, very conflicted with my
sure. Yeah, that'd be quite challenging. Yeah,
it was challenging for me, but you know, by the end of the 10 days of silence, like I'm in my mind, I'm doing all these arguments. I'm arguing about why, you know, for God or for against whatever the Buddhist philosophy that they're presenting. Sure. And just like, you know, 10 days you know, of sitting in meditation for 12 hours a day, that's a lot of swirling thoughts. And by the end of it, like I had this clear thought come into my mind, is like, who are you trying to defend? You know, like, what are you arguing with, you know, like, and at that point I realized like that was what I did my whole life, was just, I was constantly having these I mean, I think I am like I'm a critic basically. I'm constantly like critiquing everything, you know. It's the judgment thing, you know, and rationally trying to figure things out, and so then that was a big point of awareness, is just like how much that was a part of who I was, and that I didn't have to do that. Yeah. But anyways, I mean, Karina was just she it wasn't like she did anything in specific or said anything in specific. It was she embodied to me the way of being that wasn't, I don't know, fundamentalist or exclusive, or what I now call it supremacist, you know?
Yeah, for sure. You make an excellent point, though. Just a couple things you've mentioned, your brother having this transformative experience, your wife being a model of openness, and just having relationships with people who you care about, who are outside of the bubble you've encased yourself in, can be really eye-opening. It gives you an opportunity to recognize their humanity. You also mentioned, people that you met in the various countries that George W. was calling axis of evil, and you're thinking, wait a minute, I know some people from that country, and they're lovely people. Just recognizing people's humanity can break that hold of that exclusivity and that judgment that you can live in.
Yeah. So all this time in Cincinnati, I'm still like interested in my, like I said, the creating community.
Mm-hmm.
That's still something that is true to my value and mission or purpose. So me and Karina decided that we would pack up, sell all our stuff, and we got a VW van, and we set out to work on like organic farms and small communities. We did that for 2 years.
Okay.
So we traveled around just the whole country, and we were living in our van or living at farms, working and trying to find community, and in that way, more kind of rooted in the land than
mm-hmm.
in urban environments. But that time also was like further along the same trajectory of seeing the beauty of humanity, because when you're like just living in your one space and watching the news, it's like it's very easy to get this kind of idea that it's chaos out there, and there's people running around with their guns, and they're all on meth, or I don't know, whatever. You get this
Sure.
idea that like you have to have your little safety bubble, and that everything out there is chaos. And but for me, like getting out there and just like being totally in the flow, meeting all these people, farmers and people in all over the country that were just, priceless jewels, like so beautiful and generous. And it's like, that just reconfirms like this thing of like that idea of that I think is embedded within the original sin doctrine, is that like we are wicked and deceitful above all things. Like that's just not true.
It's just not true. I think this every time we, and you mentioned the news, but every time there's a natural disaster, or in the case of the war in Ukraine, but people just do amazing things, sacrifice for the benefit of everyone else. And, we have this dystopian idea of, in a catastrophe, everybody is looting and that kind of stuff. And sure, maybe a small percentage does that, but mostly people are coming together and bringing food and water. And, that's human nature, right? Mm-hmm. Is to care for people. And I totally agree that the reality, the evidence says against this idea of original sin.
Yeah. Yeah. We were part of a Christian Zen group in Cincinnati, and that was like it just blew my mind when the leader, the Zen guy, he was like, I was talking to him about original sin, and he was just like, oh, well, I believe that we're like fundamentally good. Mm-hmm. Just it was crazy to me that just blew my mind. Just to have that idea, like, it's a shattering of this paradigms.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when we one of our last stop on our tour, living in our van for 2 years, we ended up at a really beautiful community in Northeast Missouri. It's called the Possibility Alliance.
Mhm.
I don't they've I don't think they're still in existence as they were then, but
Okay.
they were kind of like Luddites, if you know the
Yep.
term. Yeah. So they were, living off their land. They had simplified their life. No electricity, no cars. They were a Quaker community,
Okay. Yeah.
and they they just had simplified to the point where they didn't really need it. They lived off $9,000 a year. This whole community. They had a gift economy, in their community. It was just a beautiful, beautiful place and beautiful people. We spent 4 months there, and it wasn't my first introduction to Quakerism, but me and Karina basically accepted that as our kind of spiritual structure or whatever. So I felt like Quakers, and I don't understand why. That's one thing, like listening to a lot of these atheist and agnostic communities, deconversions and stuff. It's like, I haven't really heard many people talking about Quakerism.
Yes, that is probably true. I have several friends, by the way, who are Quakers, not necessarily on the Luddite end of the spectrum, but like I appreciate that many of the stories on podcasts like mine tend to be from fundamentalist backgrounds, and the reason is that contrast is so stark, so that when they have these moments of realization, there is no going back.
Right.
And so for people that have a more progressive Christianity, they have a more, open theology, if you will, it just isn't as stark. And that's okay. I say a lot. There's a spectrum of the Christian practices, from some of them are terrible to some that are really good, doing good in the world. And that's okay, right? It isn't for me, but but it's okay for others who find that meaningful and useful.
Right. Because the Quakerism basically is it's non-dogmatic. There's no doctrine. It's basically that you have to accept to be a Quaker. You can be an atheist Quaker. You can be an agnostic Quaker, but and so that's why I think that I think Quakerism is actually a great jumping point for people coming out of more fundamentalist environments, because it's still within the Christian tradition. There's a history of practice, right? And there's a very limited structure, but it's still something, that is not just nothing, right? Like,
yeah, I feel like I do want to turn the conversation to humanism for just a minute, but like for sure, there are listeners who either are currently or will move into a progressive Christianity or like Quakerism. I think of maybe not quite as progressive, but as a lightweight theology, right? And that is a move that will be useful for some, and maybe has been for you.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to defend just for a second. For me, the whole recognition for me was everything you've described, Drew, about the connection with human beings, the community. The through line and all of that is people, right? Yeah. And so for me, it was the people are the magic. The human beings, the connection with one another is the magic. That's the thing that drew me to church. That's the thing that continues to drive me to do things like this and the communities that we're building. And that there is no need for a supernatural layer of even a thin one on top of that. There's enough there, right? It's not nothing. It's us, it's humans, it's people. And so I'm not a nihilist, if that makes any sense, right? Like I'm saying to love and to be loved is the greatest human achievement possible. And that is the thing that fulfills us and what have you. So.
Yeah. I mean, I would, well, I'll just continue with the story. So anyways, we went from the Possibility Alliance and ended up kind of miraculously being able to buy 40 acres of land in Kentucky.
Wow. Okay.
with a small farmhouse, and we were trying to just, live off the land, homestead, but also, open it up for anybody else who wanted to try to come, do community. And yeah, that was the idea behind that space, was to create something like the Possibility Alliance, but which was closer to our families. And we lived there for 5 years. We had our son there, but it ended up being too isolated. It was
okay.
like we were really in the hinterlands,
Okay.
pretty far out from any kind of town, or I mean, there were people around, but they were mostly of the, rural stereotypes.
Okay. Yeah.
And not people that we like connected with on a cultural or philosophical.
Right. Understood. Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, so we started to plan on moving and selling the place. This was, after 5 years. It was just like we didn't see ourselves staying there, and but we didn't really know where else to go. And I wanted to move back closer to Georgia, to my parents and friends and stuff. And but Karina still really wanted to. She didn't want to like move back into a city, or she wanted to still be kind of in the country, have access to land and stuff, for Ezra, our son. And so we found this community. It was a Christian intentional community here where we are now in Comer, Georgia, that took in refugees and would help them when they first came in to learn English and get acclimatized.
Mm-hmm.
They had been here since the 1980. Doing this work of being a welcoming place for new refugees, but they were also like about 12 to 15 kind of permanent members who lived communally, shared purse, ate together.
Okay.
Just lived simply. They didn't. It's a beautiful place. They have 256 acres, and they grow a lot of their own food and blueberries, and just really are a beautiful expression of kind of a lot of the ideals that are held within Christianity of neighbor and simplicity, and so I had a lot of hope for this place, that that they were a group of people who were not had somehow avoided the exclusivist kind of issues within Christianity, and were able to just really do the love your neighbor thing. So we ended up, they did like 4-month volunteer terms. So we were able to go live there, and we ended up staying on for multiple volunteer terms. And after a year and a half, basically you either need to like join in.
Okay.
Kind of like they have like a novice and a different progression to becoming a full member of the community.
Sure.
So in order to do that, you have to accept their doctrinal statement.
Okay.
Is, I mean, it's three things. I mean, one is like, really non-offensive to me, is, following Jesus in the way of loving your neighbor as yourself, something like that.
Sure.
But then, another one is Jesus is Lord. And that was where I couldn't go there. To me, it was just like, it's like USA is number one, using the word Lord. I mean, that's like a term for, it's like king or something. You know, this model of, you know, male dominance, right? Like that is the top of the pile. Like I wasn't able to do that. I wasn't able to say that or accept that as being, and I didn't really want to be a part of a community that was doing that.
Yes. Okay. So then was that kind of a final straw for you? Did you recognize like, I don't think I can do this at all anymore, or?
Oh yeah. So I mean, yeah, then like realizing like how that, that supremacy thinking was like just endemic. It's part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
That there's, basically, yeah, led me out. And then that was 2019, and just continuing to like listen to podcasts. That's when I've been listening to podcasts for a long time, but I really like, was listening to a lot of podcasts and just following the rabbit trail, you know. It's like, and of how the structure of Christianity became wed with, you know, racism, white supremacy, you know, and it was just, they became wedded through colonialization and spread, you know, throughout the world in that way. And so, yeah, basically I just got to the point where I was like, yeah, I'm done with identifying as a Christian and
right.
In any way, or even looking to try to, you know, I still do construction and stuff. So there's always this question of, you know, demolition or remodel. Right.
Right. Right.
You know, and for a long time, I mean, I was really into remodeling, you know, like,
yeah.
can I participate in this thing and
yep.
help shape it into something new? But it's like, at this point, I didn't say this either, but like, a big part of my deconstruction as well was like getting into Rumi and Hafiz. I don't know if you know of them. They're Sufi poets.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I know who they are. I wouldn't say that I'm intimately familiar with their work, but yeah.
Well, I mean, basically, the reason the effect that they had on me was that they had so clearly like a connection to the divine, like through their poetry. I could see it was the same as mine, much more, you know, more so than my own. And so it was like but anyways, Hafiz says, you know, all religions are sinking ships. The wise man jumps overboard, you know, and so I think that, you know, Nietzsche said it, you know, whatever, 100 years ago, God is dead. But I think that what we're observing is just this, the Titanic, you know, this gigantic ship of Christianity. It's going down. And you can rearrange the deck chairs, but it's sinking.
So I definitely agree that we're in this interesting inflection point where Christianity is losing power and influence, and at the same time doubling, tripling down within various power institutions, that kind of thing. As online, people are beginning to deconstruct and find each other, and gaining this momentum. Drew, I know that community has been such a major part of your life. So on this side of that deconstruction, what are you doing these days for our community?
Yeah, so we basically bought 2 rundown houses, right? Basically, I mean, half a mile from the community. It's in this small town. And I started fixing them up. And one of the guys who was at the community with me, who had also been not allowed to stay.
Okay.
He was a single guy who really loved the community that he had experienced here in Comer, and so he didn't want to leave the area, and so he ended up staying here, and he was trying to, you know, find a place to rent or buy. And right up on our road, up in the little town, which is where our house is just half a mile away, there is a restaurant building and it also has a farmer's market and a few acres. It had been closed for 5 years and on the market. And it was called Saving Grace, this restaurant.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
But anyways, he was living in our house while I was working on it and trying to find a place to live. And I was like, well, I had been meeting with different friends. I mean, we have a community of people here that used to live at the community, but now live in town and left for different reasons. We all live pretty much on the same street. And so we have relationship and stuff. And we've talked about like, oh, it'd be really beautiful to, have a space, a community center for us. And so we had been kind of thinking about it, talking about it, and we'd even, so the idea was there. And I just said to him, well, the Saving Grace is for sale, you could buy that. And came back a few days later and he was like, all right, I'm going to do that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah.
He just went and bought it. And that was the beginning, the impetus for this thing, which was back in 2000. Well, it was right at the beginning of 2020, which was, it's kind of ironic or whatever to be starting a community center right at the outbreak of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
Wow. It wasn't really possible for us to be open, but it was okay because he ended up living here at the restaurant space. And we had a trailer that we had parked alongside, which we were using as a place for hospitality. And there was a Guatemalan refugee living there. They ended up getting married and then moving into the other house that we bought. But so basically we've our community has collectively made like this, a nonprofit, which is just a non-religious community center. And so we have, we have the farmer's market. We have an after school program that we do. We do have Quaker meeting on the back. We've had lots of different events here, but it's just kind of an open space for people to use to bring people together. We have potlucks. We've had concerts and just anything really. It's just an open space really for people to come together and have community. And for me, like deconversion and this whole is my journey, but I want this to be a space for where people who are going through that can, hopefully feel safe and welcome and get to know, other people who are going through that as well. So
that's amazing. Yeah. Drew, how can people get in touch with you or like if they're in Georgia, if they wanted to come and visit?
Yeah. So there's, the website is www.theperchcomer.com. And yeah, everything on there, like our events are on there. You can get on the mailing list. They can also email me directly if they wanted to, get to know about the Perch or talk about anything. Where I transitioned from over these past few years was into kind of what I would call it's like in the non-dual understanding of God, which do you know what I'm talking about?
Vaguely, but go ahead and just give us the quick primer on that.
Well, basically it's Taoist philosophy of, there's of light and dark. There was the paradox, truth is paradoxical, that there's no, all division is constructed by, we do that with our language and with our understanding, that. And so that the fundamental thing is our awareness, like that, in our consciousness, that is what is fundamental. And so the whole thing of, within the conversation that you have about, are you atheist or agnostic or humanist, or, these are all distinctions, right? Like that, it's this and not that, right? Like, but is there a way to say that we can say this and that, you know?
And I do just want to clarify. My thing is, are you a human being? Yes, you are. Fantastic. I love you. That's end of conversation. Like the rest of it is just details. So,
but I mean, I think it's even within the isms, you know, and it's like any kind of ism is a dividing thing, right? Like, am I a human being? I mean, I don't know that I am a human being. I'm not essentially a human being. I'm something, you know, and like I want to connect with all of what is, like all of life, right? Like that what I am fundamentally is not something that is this body, right? I don't know.
That's where we disagree, right? I mean, I appreciate hearing this, and I understand. Yeah. I understand better where you're coming from. But I mean, that's the dividing line, right? Is that I think that nature is what is, and that human beings are a part of nature, and that I don't think we need or require anything on top transcendent from nature.
Yeah, we don't. I wouldn't say we need it. It's just it is what it is.
So you assert, yes. Yeah. This is my point.
Yeah. I mean, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry that this turned into a debate, Drew. I didn't
mean
no, I'm not happen, but like I think fundamentally this is the difference, right? Why I am a humanist, why I am an atheist is because I think there is nothing beyond nature. And I think nature is magnificent and awe-inspiring and wonderful, and that the human need to add something on top of nature is the mistake.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's anything beyond nature.
Okay, but you just said earlier that you're not sure that you're fundamentally this. I'm saying I am fundamentally atoms, right? I am fundamentally physical.
Fundamentally physical.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might be, reading into what you're saying, but you seem to be talking about something beyond.
Well, I mean, I guess something beyond atoms.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say there's something beyond atoms.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, that's not like contradictory to science or whatever, right? Like there's.
So we're out of time. I would love to have this conversation longer. I will say this. This is the fundamental dividing line between why I say I'm a naturalist, why I say I'm a humanist. That is not to say that excludes everyone else. It's that the level of evidence for anything beyond atoms is not sufficient. It's not high enough for me to accept it as true. It is asserted by billions of people. Don't get me wrong. I know I'm in the minority here.
Well, yeah, I mean, like dark matter, Higgs boson. I don't know.
That's all a part of nature, or may or may not be.
I mean, that would be something beyond matter. I mean, beyond atoms, right?
Yeah, that's splitting hairs. But my point is that nothing supernatural, nothing dualistic, nothing transcendent from all of nature, which includes all of the cosmos.
Yeah, I don't think that either.
Okay. Well, but then we've misunderstood one another. I am going to wrap this up, Drew. I really appreciate it. I just thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I really appreciate what you do, and I appreciate all the stories you put out there, and for allowing me to put mine in the pot there. So, yeah, thanks so much.
Final thoughts on the episode. So clearly, I was a bit testy there, and I'm going to explain that. But first, I just want to thank Drew for coming on the podcast. I do admire Drew's drive to build community, intentionally so. I think he has a unique perspective, having traveled the world, having seen multiple religious cultures, and clearly went through what many of us have gone through in a deconstruction of fundamentalist or evangelical Christianity. So thank you, Drew, for being on the show and for sharing with us. And I do hear your heart and what you are trying to communicate, and I appreciate that, even though I'm about to be critical of it. You can find Drew's community, The Perch, at theperchcomer, COMER.com. Again, if you don't listen to the rest of this, do keep your skeptic's hat on. This is the part of the show where I typically do something I call the Secular Grace Thought of the Week. And there's a part of this that is about grace and is about kindness. But there's also a part of this that needs to be said from the skeptic point of view. Drew's original email said to me that he was building a humanist community. That word humanist has a lot of meaning. It implies a number of things. As you could hear in the conversation, Drew and I use the word humanist in radically different ways, and that's okay. I am not here to criticize Drew's belief system. And in fact, I will explain a little bit more about where Drew is now, spiritually speaking, because I don't think it was clear in the conversation. Drew sent me a link to further clarify the position that he is taking, this non-dual concept. And I'm going to provide the link to the podcast from a Rupert Spira going in depth into this non-dual concept. The simplest way to describe it is this is a description of reality where consciousness is fundamental, meaning it is the lowest primitive. So rather than atoms and physical matter, consciousness is. Now, again, this is pretty popular these days. You can listen to Sam Harris, you can listen to Philip Goff, and hear variations on this theme. This is not something that I happen to agree with. But if you want to check that out, the link will be there. You can hear more of what Drew was actually getting at. What bothered me about this conversation is that Drew misrepresented himself to me. And during the conversation, you're hearing me in real time figure that out. Go listen to it again. There was a shoe about to drop for 40 minutes. Bits that got edited out that you didn't hear was me trying to get Drew to get to the point that he wanted to make. Drew eventually made the point with 5 minutes to go, which was no way we could possibly get into that conversation in any depth. And again, I want to be really clear here. If you think that consciousness is the fundamental element of the universe, more power to you. That's fine. The thing that made me bristle, and the thing I want to discuss here, is this is nothing different than the evangelical suggestion that deconverts, people who have deconstructed, are missing something. We're doing it wrong. It's the same message. And I want you to learn to hear it when it is not coming from evangelical Christianity. Something that I observe immediately after my deconversion is a tendency for people who have deconstructed to let all the other world religions off the hook and see them uncritically. Obviously, there's wisdom in those religions, but there is wisdom in evangelical Christianity as well. It is a matter of being critical about what is true and what is not. And if you jump into a philosophical even, but religious way of thinking without critically thinking about it, we are repeating the same mistakes that we made within Christianity. In other words, there's nothing special about Christianity, either negatively or positively, when it comes to comparison to other world religions. The message of this podcast is that if you have deconstructed to the point where you no longer think there is an infinite consciousness, you no longer think there is a personal theistic entity, you no longer think there is the supernatural, that's okay. And even though there will be messages from all corners that you are doing it wrong and that you are missing something, you're not. The message of this podcast is that human beings caring for one another is what gives us purpose, what gives us meaning, what gives us satisfaction. It's what Adrian and I said last week. It's just people. It has always been people. I like to quote all the time that all of it is secular. All religious thought is secular. In my opinion, there is no supernatural, and it is the physical universe that exists. And our consciousness is emergent from the physical interactions of elements of the universe. And it is the human enterprise for all of our existence to want something more than that, to have some further explanation beyond that. But those other explanations lack evidence, including here, panpsychism and anything that indicates that consciousness is the fundamental element of the cosmos. I'm sorry. Those are the facts. And I appreciate that I am the troglodyte here. I am the cretin. I could be accused of being reductionist, but I'm a Carl Sagan atheist. I see wonder and awe and complexity and intricate beauty in nature. And I don't need anything above that. I don't need consciousness to be the bottom layer. I don't need supernatural elements. I don't need a theistic God for me to experience awe and wonder and love with other human beings. And that is the message of this podcast. That's actually what humanism is. Some of you will disagree with me. Some of you will think that Drew is right, and that's okay too. I'm not here to say that you must agree with me. You don't have to. That's the beauty of it. You get a choice. But I also feel an obligation to be very, very clear about where I am coming from and why this podcast exists. This podcast exists for those of you and me who can no longer accept things without evidence, who can no longer just take assertions as the truth. And that is okay. Until next time, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Trying. Join me and be graceful human beings. Time for the footnotes. The beat is called Waves from Mackay Beats. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can promote it on your social media. You can subscribe to it in your favorite podcast application, and you can rate and review it on podchaser.com. You can also support the podcast by clicking on the affiliate links for books on gracefulatheist.com. If you have podcast production experience and you would like to participate with the podcast, please get in touch with me. Have you gone through a faith transition and do you need to tell your story? Reach out. If you are a creator or work in the deconstruction, deconversion, or secular humanism spaces and would like to be on the podcast, just ask. If you'd like to financially support the podcast, there's links in the show notes. To find me, you can Google Graceful Atheist. You can Google deconversion. You can Google secular grace. You can send me an email, gracefulatheist@gmail.com, or you can check out the website, gracefulatheist.com. My name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.